everybody. I'm Rebecca, and this is Patrick. Hi. And welcome to the Crunch. So we're on the home stretch almost of spring conference season. Yeah, it's been going a lot. Patrick is definitely ready for it to be over, right? But you got some pretty good swag, didn't you? Yeah. So key themes from everyone. I think we've heard this year, obviously AI, but whether it's Salesforce or ServiceNow or even more recently WorkHuman, it's all about the data and the data for grounding AI to really have it deliver value and have it deliver performance. But I think one of the themes that we haven't gotten as much of a spotlight on is that, yes, it's about data, but it's also about process. And what we found particularly with some of you did too, yes, the Agentforce adopters was that those that already had well-documented processes and flows were much more likely to get success kind of out of the gate with Agentforce. So to dig deeper, joining us today is someone who knows probably more about that topic than most other folks on Earth, a very good friend of mine, Ian Gotts from Elements.cloud. Ian, welcome.
Well, pleasure. Thanks for having on board.
So I was thinking back to when you and I first met, and I realized it was almost 30 years ago when you were doing some pretty groundbreaking stuff in terms of BPM technology. And obviously, neither of us are teenagers anymore, but you guys are doing some pretty groundbreaking stuff now with Elements. Maybe you can talk for folks who don't know kind of a little bit about what you guys have been up to and what you're working on.
Yeah, God, it is 30 years. I think I've been on my soapbox the last 38 years talking about the importance of business analysis and process mapping. And it feels like that evolution is now accelerating. So some constant, I think businesses are trying to change faster. That's obviously been accelerated by the opportunity of agents. So life is just moving on. But also they need organizations need a fairly solid foundation from the systems background. And you talked about data, but I think it's also process, but also understanding how the apps work. So we've been, for the last 9 years at Elements.cloud, we've been building a platform that helps you make changes faster, make sure it reduces the risk, make sure you build the right thing. That's the process piece, which is what do people really need. So let's make sure we build that, which reduces technical debt.
Right.
But then I think the last piece is where it all comes together is how do you build complex, reliable agents? But not just build them, but how do you deploy them? So our sort of catchphrase is we turn a black box into an actionable blueprint. And I think that's where this is all coming together, which is unless you understand what you've already got, it's quite hard to build an agent because an agent, well, we're talking about digital labor. We're essentially outsourcing activities to a digital labor. And unless we understand what it is, it's very difficult to outsource it correctly. So I think that's where the process piece fits.
And when you say black box, what are you talking about in sort of tech parlance when you talk about that?
I think people have, particularly the SaaS platforms, it's been very easy to build things relatively quickly, but often they're not as well documented as you hoped. You're building on top of technical debt, on top of more technical debt, and suddenly you don't really understand what you've configured. Any changes could break something, and you really need that blueprint. It's rather like having a house that you're the third owner. People have made changes. You've no idea where the wiring is. You've no idea how the plumbing works, where the fuse boxes are. If you could have something that just instantly gave you that, so you then knew how to make changes quickly. And that's what we're doing for systems and particularly Salesforce.
That's a great analogy. I think certainly anybody who's owned a home and tried to make renovations knows there are always surprises in the walls that you didn't expect, right? When you go in. But when I think about sort of Salesforce orgs and Salesforce architectures that are out there, you often have environments where people built quickly, built iteratively, but didn't necessarily think about kind of cross cloud or even within their own cloud, different orgs sometimes, how they were going to structure things and sort of architect things moving forward. And I know, with sort of early adopters of Agentforce, we saw those that had been thoughtful about their design, had those flows in place, that sort of thing, were able to get, agents out the door 16 times faster than DIY approaches and with 75% greater accuracy, which is pretty incredible numbers when you think about it for an early product. What are you seeing sort of with customers today with Agentforce? Clearly, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of value there. And what are the key things you think that are kind of holding them back?
I think the first thing, agents are exposing those areas where maybe it isn't as well documented as you expected. The data's not as good as you hoped it would be. Maybe the processes aren't as accurately defined, because when a human does something, they go, okay, well, I know what you meant, but actually I can work around that. But an agent is quite literal. I mean, I was talking to my son saying, well, why are you eating chocolate this morning? And he said, well, it's a Wednesday. And I went, well, what's that got to do? He said, but you said on Tuesday not to eat chocolate. It's not a Tuesday. Yeah, that's not what I meant. So this idea of you need to be quite careful about the words you're using if an agent is agencies implementing it. So therefore, again, accuracy is really important. So what we're seeing from customers is that there's a bit of a hesitancy, because they're going, I don't think we're quite ready. Processes aren't well defined. It's not just about data quality, it's about data governance. There's no point cleaning up the pond if you've still got polluted rivers running into it. So it's about data governance. And then if the power of something like Salesforce platform, or in fact any platform, is AI can start to use those existing workflows, those existing data. If that's not well defined, then again there's a concern that the agents won't perform as expected. And as you said, reliability is everything.
I wonder how much of this was brought on though by Ian, though, the fact that, a year and a half, 2 years ago, there was this huge fear of missing out, the FOMO around AI. And then people sort of went too quickly and we got to that. Now we're at the fear of messing up, we're at the FOMO where people are saying, oh, maybe I need to put the brakes on a little bit, or even worse, I just made a big investment in some other DIY sort of project, and now I'm going to make damn sure that this actually works before I kind of push it out to not even my customers, but even meeting my internal users.
Oh, okay. Well, there are a couple of things there. I think one is that everyone wants to talk about the flashy, isn't it amazing? AI helped a customer do this. They reordered something. But we ought to be focusing on not necessarily the simplest agents. They can be quite complex, but we need low deployment risk, which means something which has got some value for employees. Let's start there, because it's very easy to sit and say, well, we're not ready, but you'll never be ready. You need to start building the agent building muscle, if you want, if you will. I mean, we've been involved in AI, using it internally for a couple of years. We now call it sort of business as usual. We've got like 17 or 18 agents deployed internally. We have agents on our org chart. When we think about doing anything, we always go, and I'm sure an agent could do this. So we almost think agent first. But that's taken a while to get that sort of mindset. And that takes experimentation, which is, I think, the phase we're in at the moment. So there are a couple of things. One is pick some low deployment risk areas. The second is you need to keep the scope fairly narrow. I think when people think about agents, they go, oh, it's the customer service agent. No, it's not. It's narrower than it. It's the job to be done. So think of a job to be done as what's the trigger and what's the outcome. So if you're about to go and instruct a new intern, you wouldn't say, right, great, Patrick, you're now our intern, you're customer success. You're going to let's start with something narrow. I want you to analyze an account, look at the open cases, look at the opportunities, identify, prioritize them, and then work out some actions for me. So that's a job to be done. That's not customer success. That's a specific job to be done. So I think, again, we're still understanding what best practice looks like, but there are some things that are starting to emerge, which is a topic's a job to be done, which is quite narrow. Let's pick some low deployment use cases. Once you've done that, that helps you identify the gaps. Okay, processes weren't well enough defined. The data quality is not good enough. Which flows should we be using? Which automation should we be using? Okay, they're too complex. We need to do some refactoring to make them simpler so that an agent can use them. So we don't have to boil the ocean. We don't have to change the whole systems, but it will help us focus on where to prioritize that effort, and then build those muscles of getting agents deployed, not built, but deployed fairly quickly.
I love the analogy of sort of the enthusiastic intern, right? Give them lots of rules to follow, help them understand what the exceptions might be, but kind of guide them with their skill level. And I know I've talked to your team and you've done a lot of work sort of building out agents internally for both sort of employee facing processes and some customer facing stuff. And Andrew says hi. Hi, Patrick. Hi, Andrew. And since Andrew is here, I wanted to share with you a quote from a customer, not that it has anything to do with Andrew, but to quote an actual Salesforce customer, and this gets into where I think you guys have had a lot of success with agents, but where you're helping customers with agents as well. Someone told me that the new product they have that takes the org metadata and turns that into process maps is probably one of the most badass things AI related to managing an org that I've seen so far. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what he's talking about.
Yeah, so we're calling that configuration mining. So let the ability to take all the org metadata and try and make sense of it. And then, so you ask a question, which is, how does our sales process work? And it can then look at the metadata, the objects, the fields, the automations, the validation rules, the permissions and profiles, all of that stuff, and then draw out what is a fairly complex process diagram, but it explains how the org actually works. Not how you thought it worked, not how it was documented, not how it was designed, but how it actually works. Because you're building on top of other bits of technical debt. So the permissions you thought you'd allocated it may be far broader than that because you're building on top of other things. So these diagrams are, first of all, they're targeted at a particular area, but it would take months to do these manually, and we're delivering them in minutes. So I think we're also changing the way people think about documentation, because it's now documentation on demand. I now want to look at the case object. I'm working on case. Well, okay, let's create the documentation for how the case works before we start, and then we can start working on how we make changes.
And how often are you finding once a customer actually does that with that approach, they look at it and they go, this isn't really how it should work, or this isn't really how it works?
Yeah, I think, well, okay, so I think there's people initially go, no, that's not how it works. And we're like, no, that is.
Okay.
Okay. There are things like, okay, so why have all those different groups got access to, they shouldn't be able to do that particular activity. And it's like, oh, that's because of the security model that's been built on top. Or, oh, I didn't realize that we had 7 different ways of creating a case. We shouldn't have those ways. Oh, okay, yeah, we didn't close down like the new button on a related list. So there are some really quick wins that come out of this. The first is some optimization. But the other one I talked about is data governance. Okay, how are we actually creating these things? So we think about where we started this conversation around agents. First of all, what is it actually we do? What are the processes? What's the data governance and the data quality? We can start to lock that down. And then which metadata is being used throughout, which automations, which flows, which validation rules? Do we need to change any of those because of agents? So all of, I think, of this is exposing what we've got, so we've got a solid foundation. And we're very excited about the potential, but you can now build on top of that. So suddenly we're looking at the diagrams and we can automatically identify opportunities for agents, because we can look at the text on there and go, those 4 activities, you could replace that with an agent.
Yeah. So really using that initial sort of org chart and process mapping to understand where are the optimal areas where I have the workflows and processes in place that are well defined enough that I can put an agent on them.
Yeah. So I called it configuration mining.
Yeah.
It's distinct from process mining, which is, again, really valuable. Think of us as the configuration mining as defining all the routes in a city, all the little back alleys, all the cut throughs, all the shortcuts. Process mining is looking at the most traveled routes in the city. So we're all the possible ways you could travel. Process mining is looking at how, over a period of time, people have traveled. So they're different, but complementary.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about instructions, because I know you and I have had a number of conversations about sort of what are those best practices around instructions for building agents. And you mentioned sort of keeping it limited, thinking about the sort of overambitious, enthusiastic intern. But what other kind of best practices are you seeing emerge as you talk to customers and look at who's actually getting agents into production today from an instruction perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really important, that point about getting them into production. So the technique we're seeing working really well is drawing a process diagram. And you go, well, of course you'd say that, and you've been doing this for like the last 30 years, but actually it works. I mean, over the last 20 years, people moved from like a big textual document that no one ever read to a process diagram for instructing staff.
Yeah.
This is no different from agents. But so first of all, if you draw the process diagram about how you want to get from like trigger to outcome for the agent, it's not just about can we automatically generate tight instructions, which we can, but I think there's something more important happening. Number one, you can engage with the stakeholders and go, is this really what we want the thing to do? So you can obviously, you can understand what the happy path is. Yes, that's straight through. But then what are the exceptions? And then where would we hand off to a human, or where are the regulatory issues here? So suddenly you can engage with stakeholders with a diagram, which is a lot easier than sort of a massive list of text. That's the first thing. The second thing, yes, we can generate the instructions automatically. So you're not writing textual instructions. The diagram generates the instructions.
And you say that the diagram generates the instruction. That's your tool that you guys have built.
Yeah, it's not rocket science in terms of, you think about like every activity is either generating an instruction or an action. But yes, that's something that the Elements.cloud can do. And it can generate instructions which will work in Salesforce, but a lot of the agents work in a similar way. We take it, and you can stick it in Gemini or ChatGPT, and you've got a working agent exactly the same way.
Right. But I think the initial sort of notion that a lot of us had, that I could build an agent and just continue to add instructions until I got to an acceptable level of outcome, was sort of not naive, but maybe less grasping the need for a really good workflow and process first.
Yeah, I can understand how we got there. If you think about when ChatGPT came out, what, 2.5 years ago, we all went like, give it 3 lines and write a poem. And you're like, wow, amazing. And we've kind of got seduced into that thing of you don't need to give it very much and it will give you an answer. The poem is non-deterministic. I don't care what the poem is. I don't have the exactly correct answer. But now when we're building business agents, we want them to post a record or create a to-do list or something which is quite deterministic. So we need to think about this as a process. So we've almost got to unlearn the whole, isn't GPT amazing? And come back to thinking, no, we're actually instructing an intern who is very specific about the words we use, which is why it's quite important to get those instructions right.
Well, and I think too, we were trained, particularly with early on sort of ChatGPT and other tools, to recognize that the first answer was going to be wrong, and we had to be iterative and do a better job of explaining it to it what we wanted to do, yes, rather than sort of having the perfect prompt and instruction out the gate. Right. So it was like because we had so many sort of failures and faux moves going on, because we said, no, we need to have tighter instructions for if we're going straight to an LLM, where in fact, that's where the data and the process comes in, and that becomes the context for the instruction.
Yeah. And I think that if you put that back into the real world, you wouldn't, Patrick is my new intern, I wouldn't go, here's the phone, your customer success, and then every time I catch you doing something wrong, I go, no, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. That's a really inefficient way of trying to do it. Right. Better to go, okay, this is what the outcomes look like. Is it going to be 100% correct? Probably not. But at least if when you're testing the agent or evaluating it and it's not working, go back to the diagram and go, okay, that bit there, okay, I didn't use quite the right word there. I can understand why it got misinterpreted. I'll change that. Then I'll regenerate the instructions, which also means the diagram's built is sort of your change control. You're starting to see a change log there. But the last thing I think is really important is that when you then go to management and go, I'd like to deploy this, and they go, well, tell me how it works. And you give them this long list of instructions, like, okay, better to go, these instructions were generated automatically from this diagram. Let me talk you through what the agent's doing. We can now assess the deployment risk based on what we've got here. Are we now ready to deploy? And I think that's almost the step we're missing, which is if it's, back to black box, if it's the agent just going, don't worry, it just works. That lack of confidence at the moment in the agency, I think, is what's causing us not to get things deployed. Now, roll the clock forward 1-2 years and everyone's a lot more comfortable about how they work, and maybe we'll be in a different position. But I think we've got a bit of a confidence gap at the moment. That's your FOMO. And we need to get over that. And I think we need better design documentation and better governance. We've got some great building tools, Agentforce, and other tools are great for building agents, but we need the front-end design, and we need the sort of the back-end governance to give us the confidence that we can manage that cycle properly.
I'm not sure that Patrick is going to be a BDR anytime soon, especially if he naps during important calls, right? Yeah, right, Andrew. He would be on bark.com ordering toys. Absolutely. He would send some to Sadie too, Andrew, so it would be okay. So if you think about sort of going forward, one of the other things that struck me, and particularly talking about accuracy, is we've gotten very focused where we are today on, does it give me the right answer or not as an agent? And I think what you're saying is we've got to start thinking further than that, not just can it give me an answer with confidence, but is it really going to give me that user experience that I want? And I know you have certainly a lot of agents that you all are using internally. From a user experience perspective, how are you thinking about creating that kind of engagement that either an employee or a customer wants with an agent when they may be dealing with things like asking for an exception or things like that may be beyond the realm of kind of what an agent is necessarily structured to do today?
Well, I think the first thing is not everything is an agent. I mean, it's very easy to go, everything you're trying to do is an agent. There may be a better user experience, which is fine. We may be using AI, but it's just a button. Click there and it generates a summary. So it doesn't have to be an agent. I think there are certain circumstances where an agent works really well. If people don't understand the terminology, your notations, the process, I'll give you a simple example. We use Salesforce for booking all our employees' PTO. Mm-hmm. You can start the conversation with, I want to take time off, I'm going on holiday, I'm not around next week. It doesn't matter what the phrase is. It can then guide you to, right, I need to know the date, how many days, and the reason. And then the agent will also work out, okay, you've tried to book it for a public holiday or for a weekend. Did you mean this day? So it's doing some validation in a more gentle way, but it also means that the data that's being posted, the mandatory field hasn't got 3 dots in it. It's forcing you to put the right data in. So there are some use cases where an agent really works well. That's the first thing. I think the second thing, by designing a process, you're making it is as efficient as possible. It's process improvement. So instead of the user going around in circles going, no, I didn't mean that, I did mean that, the agent is already geared up to take you through the fastest path to get to the right answer. And I think it's very easy if you're just creating agents by creating lots of instructions and don't do this and don't do that, you kind of lose the fastest path, and that therefore the user experience tends to be quite convoluted. And I think actually if you're being charged by either the number of conversations or the number of actions, we want to minimize those as well, because obviously, yes, user experience is better, but also cost is lower. So at last, the two things are working in the same direction, which is like the aim to reduce cost should drive a better user experience. But it comes back to it's all about design. Let's think about what we want this to do, rather than just launching in and going, we'll start and we'll keep adding instructions until we get it right, because that's going to end up with a fairly convoluted process.
Yeah, sort of build fast, break fast isn't necessarily what I want to go for here. With that said, you have some pretty, shall we say, for lack of a better term, inexperienced people on your team doing some pretty clever stuff based on taking this kind of structured approach.
Well, that's very unfair. I think Elliot isn't inexperienced. He's been building agencies his entire career. He graduated 6 months ago is a different issue. But yeah, you're right. Using this approach, people who've got strong business analysis skills, they can engage their stakeholders, can relatively quickly build these agents. Because we're now almost building agent snippets. We know how to collect a record and validate it. We've almost got these little Lego bricks where he's now reusing these and going, okay, I know how I've got these different bits and pieces that come together in the diagram. So yeah, Elliot, Megan, they are probably the most junior people inside Elements, but because they understand what the process is meant to do, they are thinking from an agent mindset, which I think is quite interesting. They're not having to unlearn anything. They're not developer mindset or a non-declarative developer mindset, or how would the flow work? They're coming at it from a business analysis. Okay, how would I approach this? And then they're getting support from our admin team to build the flow or build some of the back end systems.
Right.
But yeah, they're working
that learner's mindset. Yeah. Excellent. Well, I think we've only got a few minutes left, so that means it's crunch time. Yes, it's crunch time. That's right. So Patrick's favorite part of the show, where we ask you a few personal questions. Ian. Who is your favorite fictional character?
Fictional character. Deadpool. Just because I like Ryan Reynolds.
Deadpool, not Wolverine.
No, I think they are the two of them play off each other so well, but I think it's got to be Ryan Reynolds. Mainly because there's the aviation gin bottle up there. I spoofed one of his videos where he was talking about how to make aviation gin, because he was talking about a process, but he kind of wasn't. And I spoofed it by turning it into a process mapping workshop where I took a bit of his video and then I mapped the process and went back and forth. So Ryan Reynolds is a huge fan of his.
Did he send you a free bottle of gin for it?
Sadly not. But he didn't send me he also didn't send me a cease and desist. So I guess I'm good gin now.
Well, I'm gonna have to look that up. I definitely want to see that. Another question for you. You've lived in different places, Ian. Where's your favorite place?
Oh, definitely here, San Francisco.
San Francisco.
Where we now are, San Francisco.
Because you've been there how long now?
About 10, 12 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm now a US citizen, which is great. Proud to be a US citizen. So yeah, it's good.
Excellent. What's your favorite color?
Purple.
Why purple?
So it's a color. I don't know. That's interesting. I've never been asked why purple. I certainly know it's purple. The big battle when we created Elements was I wanted the app to be purple, and we just couldn't make it work. I mean, Gongs made it work, but we couldn't. We got a blue one. But I managed to sneak purple into as one of the rings in the logo in Elements. So yes.
There you go. Okay. All right. And finally, if you could be any person or thing, what or whom would you be?
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, purple because of Prince?
Yeah. Actually, if I could be any person or thing, I think about bass playing and just his musical ability, being Prince. Yeah.
Oh, so that the color question was the perfect segue into the person question.
It was actually, yeah.
Brent will appreciate that answer as well.
Sadly, not here anymore. One of the questions I always ask other musicians is, which artist would you have wanted to see who've never been able to see? And for me, it's definitely Prince. We were at quite a small club in San Francisco, and we're just chatting to some of the bar staff, and they said that Prince had been playing a massive arena, and he'd wandered into the bar about midnight and just stood on stage and played till 4 a.m. just because he wanted to. For anyone who happened to walk in, just amazing musician.
Yeah, he's one on my list that I would have liked to have seen as well. Definitely. Oh dear, absolutely, Brent. You guys will have to get on together and talk Prince. But we could talk about music, I think, all day, and we could talk about process mapping and what you guys are doing with Agentforce a lot more. But that's about time for us today. Thank you, Ian, so much for joining us. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts and insights with us. Look forward to talking more soon. And thanks everybody for joining.